have to follow up because I just don't see us getting through everything in one sitting. Unless you guys want to be here for like the next 6 hours.
Honestly, like
I honestly took notes on just about every chapter. I mean, I loved that. Just my first impression of it, I loved his comparing or of him taking the Old Testament, which really is what they use. That was their scripture. And using the Old Testament to confirm that Christ is the Messiah by using and comparing the Old Testament. I just love doing that. And I took, like I said, I took notes on basically every chapter. So
yeah. Just on that, you can actually tell Justin is not a Calvinist in any respect, even like in terms of epistemology, because like I'm sure you've come across presuppositionalists. You know, they basically claim you can't use evidence to prove God. You have to presuppose the reformed understanding of the triune nature of God, and Justin doesn't actually hold to that view, because like in the Apology, as well as his dialogue with Trypho, he appeals to the fulfillment of prophecy as not just like an evidence, it's actually a self-sufficient proof. I actually was rereading like the first and second Apology and like blogging here and there on this. It's like, as I note here, all throughout the first Apology, Justin points to the fulfillment of prophecy as evidence for the truth of Christianity. In chapter 53 of the first Apology, we read that fulfilled prophecies are, quote, sufficient for the persuasion of those who have ears to hear and understand, and that's the Antonician Father's translation. The Greek term translated as sufficient here is autorakis, a term that denotes something that's self-sufficient or formally sufficient, you know. So for Justin, as Rob noted, the fulfillment of prophecies like Isaiah 7, 52 to 53, those in the Psalms such as 2 and 110, is not just evidence, but they're actually self-sufficient proof of Christianity. So like you have Justin, you know, who's in the 2nd century, just saying the fulfillment of prophecy is self-sufficient proof, not just evidence of Christianity. So like when we kind of go through like his theology of baptism and the Eucharist and other things as well, you know, salty Calvinist tears all throughout, you know, but he wasn't a proto-Calvinist at all, like, you know, on anything.
Oh, he debunks it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and we're talking about presuppositions here and evidence as well. Like his worldview is not reformed at all. It's not like say he was largely reformed, but he was inconsistent here. There's like he wasn't whatever he wasn't a proto-reformed Protestant. You know.
Yep.
Yeah, he spends an entire chapter on how prophecy is fulfilled, but not directed by God or not determined by God. He totally destroys determinism.
And another time, like multiple times, like I only read about half of the book, not the actual full one. And the one thing that I noticed over and over again is it was saying that the man's own reasoning and ability to hear the word. There's like literally no hint whatsoever that there's a God's sovereignty dictating the will of the person. No, it's the person's own will or his own reason that has the ability to choose between good and evil. It has made a lot of reference between like people able to choose doing evil act and the people able to choose good act. And we're being and everyone will be judged according to their actions.
So that's in chapter 12. Every man goes to everlasting punishment or salvation according to the value of his actions. Yeah, it's all over.
Can I share my absolute favorite quote on this? It's actually in his second apology. And he's talking, it's chapter 11 of his second apology. He's talking about Socrates. And he says, for no one trusted in Socrates so as to die for this doctrine, but in Christ, who was partially known even by Socrates, for he was and is the Word who is in every man, and who foretold that the things which were to come to pass both through the prophets and in his own person when he was made of like passions and taught these things. This is exactly, Joseph Smith could not have guessed this doctrine better. This is the Spirit of Christ. He's literally saying Christ is in every man. But Calvinists and, of course, all Protestants say that, well, if you have Christ, you're saved. That's not what Justin is saying. He's saying that every man has a conscience, and we call that the Spirit of Christ.
Even
And I
after the
absolutely
fall.
love that.
Yeah, even after the fall, that there's still some innate goodness, like the image of God, like if you want to understand in a moral sense at least, was not completely negated with the fall. There's no total depravity for Justin.
And that alone just destroys Calvinism.
Yeah, one retort though will be like, well, Justin didn't actually know Paul's letters. He had a diminished New Testament canon. Recent scholarship though has actually shown, especially when it comes to the dialogue with Trypho, he used Galatians and Romans. He knew Paul's letters. I reproduced like some of it from a recent book on the work of the law in the 2nd and 3rd century. You should get the book, but here's the some of the transcripts about Justin. He did know Paul's letters. And that comes from the book Matthew J. Thomas, Paul's Works of the Law in the Perspective of 2nd Century Reception, which is an excellent book. It kind of shows like how Paul's letters was interpreted and received in the 2nd century was not proto-Protestant. It's more like if you're familiar with the New Perspective on Paul by like Dunn and Wright, very similar to their interpretation.
Contextually, it doesn't make sense to argue that Justin Martyr didn't know about Paul, because so going back to just the basic fundamentals of who he was born in the late 1st, early 2nd century, right? He had his conversion probably in Flavia, Neapolis, where he was spending the early years of his life. And that's actually Palestine. So we're talking like 55 miles due north of Jerusalem. So he has his conversion there, probably during the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135-ish. But then eventually, towards the middle of the century, he moves to Rome. So if Paul was in Rome, and Rome was the literary hub of the Christian Empire, well, next to Alexandria itself, and you had Justin living in Rome for probably at least a decade before he started writing, the idea that he didn't have access to the letters of Paul, or worse yet, that he would neglect them, it just doesn't really make any kind of sense.
It's a pathetic attempt to try to explain Justin Martyr, because you cannot reconcile Justin in all aspects. It's not like, say, one or two very small things here and there, like premillennialism versus all-millennialism. It's the entire kit and caboodle, like worldview, assumptions, nature of man after the fall, baptism, Eucharist, ecclesiology. It's everything. Even once we kind of get to, like, he's understanding the subordinate relationship between the Father and the Son and stuff like that. It's like, however you want to label him, he clearly was not a proto-Protestant. And here's the thing, and I don't know why so many Protestant apologists don't get it. We don't have to show that all our doctrines, or even most of our doctrines, can be found in 2nd or 3rd century texts. But they have to, because they reject the idea of a great apostasy. There has to be this kind of faithful remnant consistently from, like, say, the end of the New Testament era onwards, So, like, and when you kind of ask them, okay, it could be one proto-Protestant, from like 100 to 1100, for instance. The gymnastics is amazing.
Yes, and I make the argument the proto-Protestant, the closest proto-Protestant, are the Gnostics. Like they're the only people that will deny baptism. The only people going to deny works. The only people that will deny
free will.
Yeah, but as soon as you start pointing these things out, they go, oh no, look at the Gnostic, look at their ontology, and just how like radically different that is. But you have to remember to specifically focus on the soteriology. That's where the link is between the two, because I've lost count of how many times Calvinists will just like totally gloss over all the parallels in the soteriology and just focus on the differences.
Yes.
Let's deflect away from this distressing comparison between their soteriology and my own, and then focus on something.
The very, very first thing that clued me in how the soteriology of the Gnostics and the Calvinists are very similar is how the doctrine of the original sin for Gnostics were. Like, why they view the body as evil, and it was because of people are guilty of Adam's sins, and because of that, the body is corrupted. So we have to you have a outside force calling you to be saved. Something like
total depravity and the idea that anything of matter or anything material was evil, and you could not overcome evil by anything physical that you could do. So you had to have a spiritual manifestation monergistically saving you from material and making you spiritual, or making you a pneumatic. Yep.
Pneumatic, man.
Yeah, and that kind of explains like the frankly the functional disdain of like say baptism or the Eucharist, or like even later on like any other means by which God uses a physical instrument of some sorts to bring about his will. Like even when it comes to say the nature of priesthood, it's basically just ordination to a function. In most of Protestantism as well, you have that with Luther in 1521, I believe, with the Babylonian captivity and stuff like that. So this kind of a system kind of permeates like most of what we would call Protestantism, not just Calvinism.
Going back to what you said, Robert, in regard to like Socrates being influenced by the Spirit of God. Recently I came across something very interesting called Zoroastrianism.
Yeah.
Zoroastrianism. Yep.
Yes. Do you guys are familiar with that or no?
Yeah, they're a hip hop band from the 1980s.
Say what?
Yeah, I'm just joking. I said they were a hip hop band from the 1980s, but that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the one thing I kind of find interesting is like it is how they're talking about it. They have a prophet and kind of talking about monotheism and how he was inspired to do things. And to me, it's kind of like how Socrates was moving. The spirit was able to influence Socrates, but you can also demonstrate that other people across the globe, you have God trying to influence other people doing the same thing, which also leads to the possibility you can have the same things in the New World. Do you guys are familiar at all with them or no?
What's your point, Eric?
Okay. First off, are you guys familiar with the Zoroastrianism religion or no?
With Socrates?
No, Zoroaster.
No.
Right, but okay, repeat your question.
Mike, okay, are you guys familiar with that religion or not?
Yes.
Yes.
Aspects of it, but the problem with it is it's such an ancient religion that you don't really know like how where different aspects of it originated from and how it developed over time and different things about their beliefs. I understand.
Yes. The point I'm making is that the possibility something like the spirit that influenced Socrates can also influence other people like that religion as well. That's all the point I was saying.
Right.
I'm open to that.
Well, Justin actually makes the case that even Socrates and Plato and all these Greek philosophers borrowed from Moses. I mean, they would have known Moses's writings. They would have known, at least been familiar with the stories, the mythology that Moses came through, and they borrowed heavily from Moses. And he makes the case all the way throughout his document here that the gospel is basically known among all nations.
like a common response to that is like, well, Father and Socrates were unregenerate and they're in hell, so Justin was wrong. But even if Justin was wrong about that, it shows like what presupposes that is a rejection of total depravity and the belief that God can possibly influence people in a moral soteriological sense anyway. So even if he's wrong about the certain people, like about Socrates at all, it does show like for Justin, it's just taken as a given this is the case. His case doesn't rest on where it was the case for Socrates or Follow. He uses some examples, but as it showed, like even if he's wrong about them, like which is the common response, it's like still the assumption though is this very non-reformed, very more positive view of anthropology and stuff like that, even after the fall.
Yeah, it's their entire worldview. I mean, you have to have a worldview starting as your foundation. And if you start with a worldview that matter is evil and that total depravity exists, then your worldview is going to look that all men are depraved and can't have any influence or any spark of divinity, any afflatus. And Justin doesn't have that worldview. His worldview is that men are born good and they have the ability to choose good and evil. And you can see that just in example after example. There's just nothing in his worldview that even suggests that total depravity exists.
And the thing is, like, he wasn't an outlier. This was the general view of the second, third century. He says Irenaeus, for instance, he's like a heavy hitter as well, like the 5-volume trudge that's against heresies and other works as well. So it's not just Justin, he's this anomaly. He's representative of this tradition, at least when it comes to this perspective.
Yes.
You could go so far as to say it was a universal view of the
like baptism of regeneration.
Like that, yes.
Yes.
If only they knew about the thief on the cross.
Apparently, he also didn't really read the Gospels in addition to not reading Paul. So. Those poor yokel early Christians just not getting it.
So how are we going to go about this? Will we like say chapter 1, if anyone has any notes, chapter 2, if anyone has any notes or what have you?
Sure. Does anyone have anything prior to chapter 8?
I have chapter 5. So, Rob, you have anything?
I have a discussion of the wordplay in the Greek of chapter 4. If anyone's interested.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear that.
I haven't had a chance to actually read any of your blogs on this one. I know that you've made plenty of them, but I've just been swamped.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine.
So that, by all means.
Yeah, sure. Unless there's the other Rob or Eric has anything as well prior to chapter 4.
5.
Okay,
Mine's
well,
5.
okay. Well, I used the Shaft translation, but I also use another translation. St. Justin Martyr, the First and Second Apologies, translated by Leslie William Bernard, which was published by Paulus Press, Ivan Logos. So I'll just use this translation. First Apology 4. By the mere statement of a name, nothing is decided, either good or evil, apart from the actions associated with the name. Indeed, as far as the name with which we are accused goes, we are most gentle people. Now, gentle translates krestotetai, which is a wordplay on the original Greek, in a footnote commenting on Justin's wordplay, because it uses like crest as opposed to Chris. If you're familiar with the whole, I think it's Suetonius, kind of mentions like a Christus, not a Christus, that Christians were believing in. This kind of has ramifications for this as well, like Jesus' historicity. I know it's kind of a minor point, but this is something I've been working on recently. Justin knew the real meaning of Christ's name, yet he also saw the apologetic value of the likeness of Christos and Christos, gentle, loving, or kind, compare Luke 6:35. In the ancient world, similar wordplays on names are frequently found. Here, popular mispronunciation on the word may have contributed to the confusion. And you see this, for instance, in Suetonius, Claudius 25:4, that says how Christians believed in a Christus. Because, like, I've been helping someone do a general article responding to Richard Carrier on Jesus' historicity. And one of the extra biblical sources is Suetonius, but he mentions a Chres, Chrestos, as opposed to Christus with an I. And, like, some have claimed, well, this is not belief in Jesus the Christ, or it's a different Christus, And there's been a lot of work on this, but, like, even Justin in the 2nd century actually has this, like, Christ and crest issue. Like, it's a wordplay, or it's very common, and this kind of wordplay by early Christians may have contributed to the mispronunciation or mishearing by Suetonius and others. So I thought that was kind of interesting that there's this wordplay in the first apology that kind of sheds some light on extra-biblical attestations of Jesus as well. I just came across that, so I thought it was pretty interesting.
That helps. He actually, in my document that I'm reading, it says there is this Crestian, and he translated it as excellent. Yeah. So I like that. Thank you for the extra info. So chapter 5. I thought it was interesting how that the Christians were condemned or charged with atheism. And when you think about, atheism, and I've kind of looked into atheism quite extensively in my past studies, we are actually atheists to the Trinity. We are, everybody is atheist to someone. We are atheists to Zeus. We're atheists to, the Norse gods, Thor and Odin. But there's all these kind of similarities within all the gods that are somehow relevant. Like, there's always seems to be like a creator god. There seems to be a head god. You have, Jupiter or Zeus, who's just like the head god and one of the primordial gods. But here, so they believe in this primordial god, but they call him a different name, but they're still charged as atheists. And when we think of, of God, we think of our creator, and that's how we view God. And that's like the highest level you can be is the creator. And he talks about Socrates, and he says, and when Socrates endeavored by true reason and examination to bring these things to light and deliver men from the demons, and the demons themselves by means of men who rejoiced in iniquity, compassed his death as an atheist and a profane person on the charge that he was introducing new divinities. So, any atheist is charged with introducing these new divinities, and that's exactly what the charge of Joseph Smith is that we believe in this new God or different God, but yeah, we believe in the God of the Bible. We believe in the Logos. And so he continues and he says, for not only among the Greeks did reason or Logos, the Logos, prevail to condemn these things through Socrates, but also among the barbarians, that they were condemned by reason or the word, the Logos himself, who took shape and became man and was called Jesus Christ. So here we have a new God, and that's what the Christians are being condemned for, is for bringing in a new God.
And for also simultaneously denying the whole pantheon of Greek gods, and even more troubling at times, denying that the emperor himself is divine, which got them into all kinds of hot water. So around the same time that Justin Martyr is writing his apologies, you've got the account of Polycarp's martyrdom, where the proconsulate is like, say away with the atheists, and Polycarp just gestures to the entire throng of the audience that's there, away with the atheists, and just throws it right back in their face. So that was a pretty common motif in the early Christian period, the charge of atheism.
And especially as you know, or like the refusal to bow down to the emperor cult, like not even like to offer a pinch of incense.
Oh yeah, no. Streng verbot.
I have something on chapter 6. Like once we're finished with chapter 5, because I'd like to get your Errol's feedback on what Justin says about angels in chapter 6.
Oh, here we go.
So I guess just one last thing. I thought that it's interesting that as we go through, he uses the Logos, the word, actually quite often as the throughout his text. And the logos is reason. It's the ability to comprehend, the ability to think, and is of course is used as word in the Old Testament. But there's other things that I think he uses it quite consistently throughout his document. So anyway, just throwing that out.
Yeah, you really got to check the context on that one. There's actually, when Robert and I were reading Origen's homilies on Psalm, he talks about the logos so often that the translator just opted like not to translate logos. He just left it logos in every case, and he's like, there, just that, because it can really change depending on what context it's being used in when you use it like that profusely.
Right. Chapter 6.
Yeah, sure. Again, I'll just read from the Bernard translation. Hence, we are called atheists, and we confess that we are atheists with reference to gods such as these, but not with reference to the most true God, the Father of righteousness and temperance, and the other virtues which is unmixed with evil. But we worship and adore both Him, God the Father, and the Son who came from Him, and taught us these things, and the army of the other good angels, who follow Him and are made like Him, and the prophetic spirit, giving honor to Him in reason and truth, and to everyone who wishes to learn, handing over without grudging what we have been taught. And with reference to, like, say, the worship of the Father, the Son, and the army of the other good angels, this is what she writes in a footnote. This is one of the most enigmatic passages in First Apology. Attempts have been made to avoid the sudden and embarrassing introduction of angels before the prophetic spirit. Thus, straton has been taken as the object of didac anta, either parallel to hemas, i.e., and taught us and taught the army of the good angels, or parallel to tauta, i.e., and taught us these things and belief in the army of the good angels. Both of these are unconvincing and are strained interpretations of the text. Straton has been also amended to stratagon, so as to refer to Christ as the head of the angels. If, however, the text is taken as it stands, worship and adoration in a liturgical context are addressed to God the Father of righteousness, the Son who came from Him, the army of the good angels, and the prophetic spirit. Justin closely connects the good angels with Jesus as the messengers of God who would accompany Him in His glory at the last day. In a remarkable passage in dialogue with Trifle 128, he states that as the Logos has a separate, permanent existence from the Father, so there are angels who have a permanent existence. It is Justin's Christology that is at the root of his theory of the origin of angels, and he clearly goes beyond the Jewish tradition, which held only to a temporary existence for angels. So it seems like in this passage, if you were to take the Greek text as it stands, worship is given to God the Father. And notice, like, God is not the Trinity here. God is the person of the Father, then the Son, then the company of good angels, and then also the prophetic spirit. So, like, usually the argument is, like, liturgical worship is given only to God only, but here we actually see not just, like, the Father, Son, and Spirit, but also the good angels seem to be the recipients of some type of liturgical worship or veneration as well. And also, like, his Christology is like an angelomorphic Christology as well. So, Trinitarians cry. So, but I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on Justin's angelology on this point, Errol, or anyone else. I did find this kind of a translation and footnote to be rather interesting, though, because its ramifications on worship and angels and Christology be pretty important.
Yeah, a fair amount of ink has been spilled over this one because it's troublesome to almost everyone. So Bogdan Booker, he has his theory on this. I was actually talking to David Waltz about, like, the merits or potentially lack thereof of Booker's, way of interpreting his way around this. I suppose the easy out is to point out that there's all kinds of, like, lacuna and potential corruptions in the text, and maybe this just got fudged by a scribe at some point, but I don't know how well you can go over that. So I think, Robert, you're using the ancient Christian writers.
Yeah, I have on Logos.
Yeah, this is I'm pretty sure Barnard was the translator on this one. And so I was primarily going with this fancy Oxford Early Christian texts. And here's what we got.
Dare I ask how much that Justin Martyr won from cost?
You probably shouldn't.
Is your wife around?
She's approximately 2 yards away.
Okay, you can PM me later, but yeah, okay.
Jelly good, yeah. Yeah, anything that has the Greek on the left-hand page, automatically the price tag goes up. Or so I. So 6.2, because they put chapter and verses into this translation. This God we do venerate and worship, and also the Son who came from him and taught us these things, and the company of other good angels who follow him and are like him, and also the prophetic spirit. So there's a footnote right after the of the other good angels who follow him that reads thusly. Our translation supplies the pronoun, which is not in the Greek. Markovich ends, believe that's alun, alpha, lambda, lambda, omega, nu. Is that the proper pronunciation there, Robert? Yeah.
Well, I go with Erasmian, so like that's barbaric to modern Greek, so it's okay.
Yeah, I've since I started teaching Magnus Greek, I've there's this whole in academia is big back and forth on proper pronunciation and just how much. So yeah, we might bastardize this to a certain degree. So anyway, he amends alun to what is that? Alto. So we've got alpha, upsilon, tau, omega, and takes this refer to God. And then there's a second footnote after the end of the sentence in the closing of the thought, and this is where they really give their 2 cents on it. So, for Justin, angel is one of the names of Christ, and then it refers us to the dialogue with Tryphos 61.1 and 127.4. The Greek alun does not necessarily imply that the Son is here ranked among the angels, although that is a natural reading, confer with Plato, etc. Actually, he gives a lot of references for that being the natural reading in its parenthetical portion, but I'll skip ahead. The notion of a bodyguard of angels brought forth together with the Savior and of the same nature was found amongst Gnostic teachings. And then he gives us a reference for Irenaeus against the heresies. But Justin normally uses the word we have translated as follow in a moral sense. The likeness referred to here is presumably a moral likeness, just as the bad angels are said to be morally like the serpent whom they follow. And once again, a reference to the dialogue with Trypho. So this is a tough knot to unravel, and I don't know how comfortable I am reading a lot more into it, because this is the kind of thing where if Justin Martyr had actually written something to his fellow Christians on this subject matter, that would potentially be of greater benefit to us, rather than a passing statement that he's making to the pagans in this particular case, which would seem to create more questions than answers on this particular point. So, yeah. Waltz was not particularly impressed with Booker's out on that one, and tended to take a more, literal, natural reading of this and just accept that for what it is. I'm sure that the pushback is going to be that he's somehow relapsing back into his Jehovah's Witness days by daring to do that. So,
yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm kind of surprised, some Eastern Orthodox and Catholics have not kind of latched onto this eisegetically and said, see, veneration of angels. Maybe because it's so tied into Christology, they're kind of really wary. It's what's the phrase? Hacking off the head to save the nose, or whatever.
Yeah, it kind of hits.
If only we had Dr. William Albrecht to help with this confusion.
Right. Well, no, he would just refer you to Booker, and how Booker just destroys any argument that should oppose it. And you can find other. You don't have to go to Waltz. There's other people who have critiqued, Booker, and scholars who have disagreed with him, not liberal scholars. conservative. Just you got to preempt all the excuses that are likely to get pulled out every time you cite opposing scholarship. It's liberal.
So as I'm reading this in this translation, he separates, he says, but both him, meaning the true God, the Father, and the Son, and then he's got in parentheses, the Son who came forth from the Son and taught us these things, and the host of other good angels, and who follow the Son and are made like him. Now, I'm thinking, the angels are made like the Son. How far do we take this? How far are the angels like the Son? And I don't know if it's just this translation, if he's trying to, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, if you ask Origin,
Yeah.
the Son is as far from the Father as the angels are from the Son.
Well, and Origin says that, they're basically gods, and that he's just the highest ranking of the gods. So I'm thinking that Justin is basically saying the same thing as Origin here, but I'm kind of questioning, does Justin actually believe that angels came from the Son? That's kind of my question.
I don't think I got that impression from any translation of this one that I've read.
Okay.
Which is 4 translations now. Yep. Go with no on.
Okay, you get the impression from this translation. So
Yeah, from all 4 of the ones that I've been through, which is the revised English version of the Antedicean Fathers, same translation that Robert's using from the Ancient Christian Writers series, the Oxford Early Christian Text. I read the one from Fathers of the Church series, volume 6. Yeah, I'm not seeing that, and I don't recollect any scholarly commentary to that effect either. But there are a lot of instances where you just, the Father is actually, credited for being the creator. When you really get into like early Christian cosmology and things like that, is the Son was just like an agent that he acted through for creation, but the Son isn't even credited as being the creator. If you're going to use the phrase "the creator," that's actually going to be deferred more often than not to the Father himself.
okay, and as I'm reading it now, it could be the Son who came forth from him. I guess I'm confusing who him is. So, but both him and the Son. So, okay, I think I did read it wrong the first time. Both him and the Son, but who came forth from him and taught us these things. And the angels are made like him, meaning the Father. Okay.
In effect,
so the Father created the angels like him. It's kind of confusing in this translation, so there's a lot there.
Yeah, but Justin didn't have some type of angelomorphic Christology as like in many other early Christians, so that's kind of between the Father and the Son and the angels is to be expected, even if it's a bit confusing.
Yeah.
And also, you did seem to have some kind of angelomorphic pneumatology or view of the Holy Spirit as well. But
yeah, that is the title of Brooker's work on that subject, which is not accepted as a given, but maybe. If only we had more from Justin. He wrote more than what we have.
Mm-hmm.
Was was it destroyed, or was it that you just simply cease making them?
Oh, things get lost. Unlike Origin, Justin Martyr was never really formally condemned by the church to deliberately burn his works or stash them away like he with Origin. It's just one of those things. There are a lot of writers that are really prestigious in the eyes of the Christians, that they didn't have all the writings for one reason or another, or even all the way up until the 4th century they had their writings. But whoops, it's like we just got done reading Papists. It's like, where'd those 5 books go? Eusebius had them, it's, and now they're gone. It's like these things happen. History can get messy like that. Let's see.
Chapter 9, before we're going to go into chapter 10, I'm guessing the unformed matter 10. He makes a criticism of the worship or veneration of idols. Now, of course, he's talking about pagan idols, but he's saying, like, well, we don't bow down or worship or give veneration to these idols or images because they don't have the form of God. Now, it does strike me as unusual, though. He doesn't actually qualify the statement. It's like, but, we do have these icons or images, but, we just give veneration to the heavenly prototype, the Catholic or Eastern Orthodox response. And both myself and Errol have actually done a lot of work on, like, say, veneration of images, and it's, and according to Richard Price, who's a priest who has translated, like, the Acta of Second Nicaea, an early attestation of the image, an image being venerated is from the 3rd quarter of the 6th century of St. Michael. So this kind of, and that's early, but it kind of shows, like, when Justin or Origen or Lactantius or others are critiquing images of, like, say, the pagan idols, they never once, like, qualify it in a way to make sure no one will critique their icon veneration or image veneration, because they had none. And they were critiquing the presuppositions that you actually find later in the Council of Trent and the Second Council of Nicaea and other dogmatic iterations and teachings east and west on these issues. So
it also was talking about incense as well in that quote, if I'm not mistaken, and which is something that's very, very prominent in Catholicism as well, alongside of the idols. It's like you're literally saying that, like, it was like qualifying as idols and worship them alongside of incense is all the same thing, which we see that thing in Catholicism as well, the whole incense thingy.
Yeah, and specifically in this translation, so this is chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, and I like the way it's phrased here. But neither do we use a multitude of sacrifices and garlands of flowers to honor those whom human beings formed and set up in temples and called gods, since we know that such things are dead and lifeless and do not possess the form of God. This, we think, is not only irrational, but is also an insult to God, whose name, through his glory and form, are beyond words, is given to things that are corruptible and need to be looked after.
That's interesting. So yeah, when you understand how they viewed idols, it's interesting because they had the ceremony that opened the mouth of the idol so that the god could come into the idol, enter the idol, and inhabit the idol. And then once you inhabited the idol, you had to keep feeding it. You had to keep maintaining it. And as I was reading this, I was thinking, remember those Tamagotchis when you're a kid? It's a little pet that you had to keep hitting the button. You had to keep feeding the pet. And
that takes it back.
Yeah, it's way back, but you had to keep feeding it. If you didn't keep feeding it, that your pet died. But that's essentially a modern day idol to what they had. And the interesting thing is that that's what God did for us. He created physical idols so that our spirit could inhabit the idol, and we have to keep feeding our idol. But it's the satanic or the adversaries counterfeit to what we are, because they wanted to inhabit bodies, and they essentially did, just inanimate ones.
Interesting comparison.
Yeah, or sometimes
yeah. What? Okay, so here's a question in regards like about the crosses, like people wearing crosses. Will we that classify as an idol according to the early church?
No, Justin, he venerates the cross. I mean, he's
Yes,
I-
but yes, he venerates the cross. And because the way I see it is like he venerates as in like the what the cross did for us. But who do you actually make a wooden cross wearing on his person?
no.
no, not historically. So
Yeah,
Abraham-
that's my point. Would he classify that as an idol?
I don't think so, because even though the early Christians didn't use the cross, they would still have conversations with each other about what symbols they could use to identify, like a visible symbol. Like Clement of Alexandria gave like several potential examples when he was trying to hash out. It's like, how are we gonna, identify each other's letters and etc. The cross didn't come up as one of those potential symbols, but someone could just as easily argue that any of those other symbols would be, a source of veneration, except for the year the Christians didn't really look at it that way. I mean, unless you're using the symbol as something more than just a means to identify, right? Because the early Christians talked about the cross a lot, but there are some scholars that have been, well, they're mainstream Christian, so they're distressed over, looking at the catacombs and saying, like, yeah, all the crosses are from later, and there's this stark lack of really, physical crosses among the Christians to represent the faith. I don't know why that has to be distressing. They talked about the cross. They talked about it. It was a powerful part of their teaching. They don't need a physical, cross to wear on them.
Well, just to pick up on this, if I could, if you read like even Tertullian, like in his book on idolatry, and Tertullian was against like veneration of images and so forth, he actually discusses like how some early Christians did actually have images or like some other iconography, but only for teaching or didactic purposes. Yes. So like for early Christians, it wasn't like an all or nothing, like say some of the more radical reformers later would engage in, like those in Munster and something like that. They were so extreme, even Luther thought they were crazy. That should tell you something. For early Christians, they did use like symbols, like they even had like some stylized chalices, like stylized manuscripts, but there's no, but once you started like using those for like not just for teaching purposes, but like once the line was crossed over and you gave veneration to the image, in like what you see like in Second Nicaea, like which is defined by Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, that would be idolatrous. But like you even have like Tertullian, who's like very opposed to like idol or image veneration, even like work on the topic, saying it's okay to use it if it's just for teaching purposes. There's actually a very good book actually by an Eastern Orthodox priest, early Christian attitudes towards images. It kind of shows like the early Christians did actually have images like stylized chalices and stuff like that. At the back of the book, at the back of things, like like he's trying to find positive evidence, like these images were venerated, and he couldn't find any evidence of that. But if you kind of ignore like how that kind of comes out, like he's trying to make the best possible case. It does kind of show like they did have images, they didn't have any problem with them as long as they were for like teaching purposes or stuff like that, but never for like any religious image. The only allowable physical religious images that were allowed, if you will, were the Eucharist, and even then they weren't venerated, but like they were the only acceptable images or physical objects in like a Sunday context, if you will.
Okay, so to me it sounds more like if they had an actual picture of painting, like if we're it would be like going to a local church and grabbing a picture of a scene. That sounds like more like what they were trying to do, but they didn't have the same technology that we have today. That's kind of the impression I get.
There are Europe has, but even then that's not like normative, but yeah.
But what about the nave of the church in Europe? And then we get onto the subject of Epiphanius, and this is it's quite the tangent. It's one of my favorites, but just based on this, like my main focus is for the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics, etc., are your icons incorruptible? And do you need to look after them and take care of them in any way? Because if they are corruptible, and they don't need to be looked after, then no problem, right? But as soon as you admit that, then you start to run contrary to the implications of what Justin Martyr is saying here, right?
So,
And of course,
so
like,
are you?
You're the silly apologetic, but Jesus is the image of God. The image is okay.
So you're saying because the icons like deteriorate over time, you kind of you have to spend money to kind of maintain them to their original condition. Is that what you're trying to say here?
Well, I'm just saying that the idea that Justin Martyr was going to write that and then turn around and venerate, icons, it doesn't make sense. I'm going to criticize, pagans for having corruptible, idols that they have to look at. Now let me go.
You had to take care of it. That's the difference. You can have symbols, but when you have to actually take care of it, that turns it into an idol.
Okay, honestly, I am not entirely familiar with actual Catholic icons. Like I don't know. Like I know they venerate icons and all that, but I have no idea what their actual process of what they actually do.
Well, in Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, the statue or the icon represents what's called the heavenly prototype, like an image of Mary, and that represents Mary in heaven. But in their theology, like you see this in the Second Council of Nicaea, you see this in Eastern Orthodoxy, but you also find it in Roman Catholic sources like historical and modern. A certain type of religious devotion and veneration is still given to the image, not simply the person in heaven. You see this, for instance, in the Council of Trent. You see this in Robert Bellarmine. You see this in the canons of the both canons of canon law, anyway. So yeah, it's basically like it's not simply like they have an image; they actually give some type of religious veneration to the image, even if all of it kind of goes to the figure in heaven it represents. It's a bit more complex than that, but that's basically the TLDR version of it.
There's a divine to the object itself. It's a window into heaven.
This kind of goes back to the Old Testament and the worshiping of Asherah and the Asherah pole. They would take the Asherah pole, which is an idol, and they would put it in the temples. But the problem is that there were more than one temple, and when you have an Asherah pole that is in one temple and an Asherah pole that's in another temple, now you've got two different gods, and that creates a problem because now you're worshiping two gods in two different places, but it's the same God. And how do you resolve that? And that's why idol worship is
two persons, one being.
Two persons, yeah, two persons, one being.
The pole is Asherah, but Asherah is not the pole. I mean, come on. Have you seen the shield?
Got you there. So, now briefly backtracking to chapter 8, actually.
Yeah.
So I thought this was interesting. I missed this in previous translation. So that we have said these things for your sake, you may deduce from the fact that it is in our power to deny that we are Christians when examined. But we do not wish to avoid death by telling lies, for we desire the eternal, pure life, and we seek after communion with God the Father and maker of all. See, there's one of the references to him being the maker of all right there. Mm-hmm. We are eager to confess we are Christians, for we who have been persuaded believe that these things can be obtained by those who have persuaded God through their actions that they were his followers, and that he ardently desired to find communion with him where there is no obstruction from evil. So, we have to persuade God with our actions.
But
This one,
I thought all we just need is to believe, and works does not matter. Is he Justin a heretic?
He just
Clearly,
he's
because
Paul.
God knows our heart. That's all he has to do.
this translation
But
says
this also shows he's not
proved.
believing imputed righteousness.
Yeah, this translation says prove to God by their works that they followed him. Prove to God by their works that they followed him. So,
That's in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, but in the footnote they say literally persuaded God in the footnote.
Yeah, they went with the more literal.
that's interesting.
But yeah. So yeah, I like that one. That one's nice. But yeah, there is also chapter 10.
Yeah, it's like
Here we go.
I love when I'm not gonna go on a tangent. Go ahead.
so many opportunities for tangents. Zillion. And we have been taught that being good, he crafted all things in the beginning from unformed matter for the sake of human beings. Such a concise statement to have so much behind it.
He also said something similar in 59, if I could just signifying how and from what materials God at first formed the world. So
There is another one that references that, I think in chapter 20, where he says, we think that all things have been produced and arranged into a world by God. We seem to utter the doctrine of Plato. And I think it's that kind of referencing the Greeks believed in that out of material creation.
Yeah. So okay, let's do this. Skipping ahead to 59, since we're going to just tackle all of the creatio ex materia in one go. And so that you might learn that when he said God made the world by changing formless matter, Plato took this from our teaching. We mean the words from the prophets. Listen to what he says in so many words. Moses, whom we have already shown was the first of the prophets and earlier than the Greek writers, through whom the prophetic spirit indicated how God fashioned the world in the beginning out of what? He spoke thus, in the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth, but the earth was invisible and unorganized, and there was darkness upon the deep, and the Spirit of God was borne upon the waters, and God said, let there be light. And it was so. This, in this way, both Plato and those who say the same thing, and we ourselves, learned that the whole world came into being by a word of God out of the previously existing things mentioned by Moses. So, yes.
Yeah.
according to Bernard in her translation, it's possible that Justin could also be gained this from the Apocrypha, like the Wisdom of Solomon 11:17. I'll just read from the NRSV. For your all-powerful hand, which created the world out of formless matter, did not lack the means to send upon them a multitude of bears or bold lions. And he actually uses ex amufu hules, which is actually the same term that's used in at least First Apology, chapter 10. So, it's generally agreed by interpreters and scholars that Wisdom of Solomon 11 here is actually speaking of ex materia, not ex nihilo creation.
Yeah, specifically, Barnard said, and I transcribed this one as well, there is no suggestion in this passage that Justin is criticizing the Platonic doctrine of the eternity of matter. Justin, in fact, mentions formless matter only, confer with Wisdom of Solomon 11:17, in order to emphasize that it was accepted by Moses in Genesis 1:1-3, and that for both Moses and Plato, God had brought the universe into existence by working on and changing formless matter. It is idle to speculate how Justin interpreted Genesis 1:1. He is content to accept the text as it stands and to see it in no conflict with the teaching he received from Middle Platonism. A creatio ex nihilo does not come within his purview.
Mhm.
Can you can you put that in the chat?
Oh yeah.
And and that's the thing, like the significance of this, like there's so many important things that come out of this. Like this means like you know, that there's something that coexists eternally with God. So that's strict numerical monotheism precluded. And also like it kind of shows, you know, one of the like Craig and other Protestant critics have claimed like there's no such thing as an actual eternity and actual infinity to transverse. This kind of shows like for Justin this was not an issue. You know, an infinity could be in time could be traversed in some way. You know, if it's like this eternal matter is being acted upon. It's a bit philosophical, but it's kind of pretty significant. You know, but it kind of shows like if you do not believe in creation ex nihilo, the logical ramifications of this would basically be, at the very least, a rejection of strict numerical monotheism. Contra Del Tuggy, Justin was not a strict Unitarian, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but, you know, there you go. And also, like, again, it shows that God is not the ultimate source of our will, which kind of gives a more logical coherence. Now, of course, Justin does not believe in personal pre-existence for anyone, it seems, except maybe Jesus, but at the same time, this kind of shows like why LDS theology actually has a leg up here. Like we believe that we're the source of our will, but at the same time, it's even just taking Justin as Justin, this is significant. You know, the ramifications of it results in a much more positive anthropology amongst many other things. So,
well, even if Justin didn't believe in the personal preexistence of the human soul, he did specifically say, going back to chapter 10, is like he crafted all things in the beginning from unformed matter for the sake of human beings. So at the very least, God in his foreknowledge would, you know, knew that he was going to create human beings, and he did this, you know, laid down all of this scaffolding for them. And we'll actually get into his beliefs on foreknowledge shortly, maybe, depending on how many tangents we go.
So he goes on right in that chapter 10. He goes on to say, in the beginning he created, for as in the beginning he created us when we were not, so we do consider that in like manner those who choose what is pleasing to him are on account of their choice deemed worthy of incorruption and of fellowship with him. And so you could argue, you know, and possibly read it into a pre-existence, into in the beginning he created us when we were not. Obviously there's some ambiguity there, but
yeah. There totally is.
But there's that you have the free will there on account of our own choices. And then right before that, between the unformed matter, he said, if man by their works show themselves worthy of his design, they are deemed worthy, and so we have received of reigning in company with him, being delivered from corruption and suffering. And so he references being of reigning in company with God, which is rulership, divine rulership, right? And later on, Justin Martyr goes on, is way more explicit, where he talks about how the Romans believed in deification of certain emperors or whatever. And then he goes on to say, we believe that only the righteous are going to receive that glory. Let's see, where was that? That was in chapter 21. He says, of emperors who die among yourselves, whom you deem worthy of deification. And he goes on and contrasts that with Christianity, where he says, we have learned that those only are deified who have lived near to God in holiness and virtue. So a lot of great stuff all packed in that chapter 10.
Yeah.
This translation is pretty close, but we have been taught that only those who live holy and virtuous lives, come close to God, are made divine. So same basic thing. And then the scholars noted on that one, this is the same word as translated to be made into gods at First Apology 21:3. So yeah, just three verses earlier, direct contrast, same Greek word.
Interesting.
So it does make it begs the question of how did people like Origen reacted to the teaching like Justin Martyr on ex materia, and how did ex nihilo become dominant Christian doctrine by the end of the 3rd century?
Origen specifically noted that many prestigious writers had accepted this doctrine. Found that troubling.
Well, Tertullian writes the whole argument against Hermogenes Hermogenes is completely teaching ex materia, and I don't know that he was ever condemned. So
you could argue that he took creatio ex materia too far in some regards. I was disappointed when I read Tertullian's treatise against Hermogenes, because his basic breakdown is, look, if matter is eternal, then it has to, fundamentally be God. Because if it's evil, then you're saying that evil is as ancient and eternal as God, and that doesn't fly. But then if you're saying that it's good, then it has to essentially be God. And at no point does he ever really address the idea that, hey, what if matter existed eternally in an inert state, in which case it's neutral until acted upon, and I kept waiting for him to actually address that as a third possible stance, and he just never did.
False dichotomy.
So I was like, okay. But you don't really get a whole lot of back and forth discussion in the extant text between the Christians who believe in creatio ex materia versus creatio ex nihilo. It wasn't like a huge issue for them. It's like, yeah, sure, Origen disagreed with his opponents on that stance, but he didn't anathematize them for it. I'm sure he would have been worship with them on Sunday.
But it still begs the question: how did, at the end of the 3rd century, it was universally accepted that ex nihilo was a Christian doctrine?
Pope of Rome.
Not, Pope of Rome's.
It's a joke. It's a papacy joke. The
Okay.
Bishop of Rome said so.
So, in other words, we really don't know.
You could argue for Greek philosophy influencing Christians away from the original position, because when you break it down chronologically, it's like all the earliest sources that you find that make more explicit references to it fall onto the side of ex materia, and then you later get ex nihilo, which, yep.
Has everyone read Blake Oster's article on creation or nothing?
I read Ostler's response to Craig's article.
Yeah.
I think I have.
Yeah, if not, it was published in the Farmers Review back in 2003, I believe. I'll just pop up the name here. It is called Out of Nothing, A History of Creation Ex Nihilo in Early Christian Thought. It's basically a response to the essay by Craig and Copan in the New Mormon Challenge, and also their book, Creation of Nothing, A Biblical, Philosophical, and Scientific Exploration. It's 68 pages in length, but it's probably the most thorough work by a Latter-day Saint on the topic. Another good book is Gerhard May's book, Creation Ex Nihilo, or Creation of Nothing, whatever it's called, but he kind of shows the earliest strata of Jewish Christianity and Judaism and stuff like that. He's basically ex materia.
Yeah, Ostler's got I think a pretty good grasp on this one.
Yeah, and speaking of Oster, he's coming onto my podcast again to defend. He's reading the Kinfolk Discourse. So.
Oh, okay. I'll watch that one, that's for sure. You gonna break down the 4 different accounts and all that good stuff, or?
Oh, we'll be doing that, yeah.
Yeah, that was fascinating, because like most people, I had just been introduced to the King Pullet sermon as the amalgamation of the 4 without any kind of background. That, this isn't everything. This might not even all be part of what was actually said, etc.
I have something on chapter 12, and I think we will definitely be discussing these stuff about the triad in chapter 13. So
Got two things from chapter 12. Are you talking about
Yes.
earlier in the passage, like very beginning or towards the middle?
chapter, you kind of phased out there. Which chapter are you talking about?
12. Talking about 12.
Well, the one I have here is his statement that, quote, each man goes to everlasting punishment or salvation according to the value of his actions.
Yes. Yeah, it
do you
is.
have notes on that one as well?
We think it is possible for one who does evil or is grasping or a schemer or escapes God's notice, and that each goes to eternal punishment or salvation, just as his actions deserve. For if all people knew this, no one would choose evil even for a little, knowing that he is going to be condemned to eternal fire. But he would restrain himself in every way and adorn himself with virtue, so that he might obtain good things from God and be saved from the regions of punishment. Again,
Well,
restrain
I'll
himself.
I'll just be focusing briefly on one thing. So, like, if you want to use that as a segue into like the longer discussion, because, but all I know is like for Justin, both Christians and non-Christians will actually be judged at the Bema seat, because like you often hear from like some
Yes.
saying the only people when it speaks of Revelation or Corinthians about the judgment seat, the Bema seat, the white seat. That's only for non-believers. Christians will not be judged at that seat. But for Justin, especially maybe because he was a premillennialist as well, no, Christians will be judged as well. And here's the thing: both Christians and non-Christians will be judged according to the value of their works. It actually reads "kata axion ton praxion." And that's the thing, like value or worth of their goods or their works, I should say. So. Basically, having the works are not simply like rewards or punishments, different degrees of rewards or punishments. That's one part of it, but it's also like where you will go eternally as well. That's in the balance as well. You see this like in John 5, you read John 5 in context, beyond verses 23 and 24. So again, it kind of shows like he held to some type of synergistic soteriology. He believed in some type of salvation through works, not only a raw works righteousness sense, but like in a more like synergistic sense, like a Latter-day Saint would agree with. But and again, like the worldview and the presuppositions he has, it's clearly not present, at the very least.
Monergism doesn't work with him at all, because he would restrain himself in every way and adorn himself with virtue. That's a thing you can do. You can restrain yourself and adorn yourself with virtue.
So you're not totally depraved and you have genuine free will.
Right. There it is.
But yeah,
I'll let you finish the point you wanted to make, because I think you were focusing on the larger section of that text, Errol.
Oh no, just that. We're going to get back into Justin's soteriology not too long from now as well, and we can explore that more. But yeah, this point right here is that it's killer in and of itself, even without.
If only he read Romans, except maybe Romans 2.
The other part from 12 was actually towards the middle of the chapter, since that's the beginning, but that you will not receive favorable omens in the sacrifice. The Logos demonstrates, than whom, after the God who begot him, we know none who is more kingly or more just ruler. So that one is that gets into the subordinationism a little bit. Who's more kingly and more just than the Logos? The God who begot him.
And he goes on chapter 13, continues on with the very explicit subordinationism.
Mm-hmm. Anyone have anything before we hit that one? Because I'm primed for that one too. That's
yeah, I'm primed. In fact, I can actually share my screen and show you the Greek portion that's relevant if you want. So
okay.
Whoever's hosting this, you just have to allow for people to share a screen.
Okay. Let's see.
Share a screen. There should be like a little angle or a little dot thing saying like allow.
Multiple participants can share screen. Okay, maybe that will let you do it.
Awesome. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I'll just read it and like maybe we can nerd out a bit. Like, but this is from the Shaft translation of chapter 13. Our teacher of these things is Jesus Christ, who also was born for this purpose and was crucified under Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the times of Tiberius Caesar, and that we reasonably worship him, Christ, having learned that he is the Son of the true God himself. So no, his Son is not the true God. The true God is the person of the Father alone. So that kind of like the Father alone is alter theos. Himself, the true God himself, and holding him in the second place and the prophetic spirit in the third, we will prove. And if you kind of look at the, this is from the Patrologia Graciae by Minja, you have Theos, God, Kaikurios, Hetros, and the other Lord. So there's two numerical lords here. Huberton, he was not a strict monotheist in the, in a sense, like numerically there was only one God and that was the being of God or what have you. For him, he believed that the Father alone was alter theos and God in an underived sense, but like Jesus is God, but a heteros Lord or a heteros God, another God or another Lord. You can't. So he say again. So like he's not a proto-Trinitarian, because this is sloppy, heretical, blasphemous language. If you're a Trinitarian, you can't claim Jesus is another God. You can't only claim he's another person in the being of God or what have you. But here you have like and this is not unique to him. You have where else dialogue with Tryphon. I know we're not focusing on this, but like he speaks of another God and Lord subject to the Maker of all things, i.e., Christ.
Yeah, actually, the commentators in this translation specifically said at dialogue with Tryphon 5:4, Justin says that only God is unbegotten and incorruptible, and he is God for that very reason. Everything else after him is begotten and incorruptible. This is one of the grounds for Justin's subordinationism. An unbegotten, incorruptible, immortal God could not be crucified, but equally such a God could not reveal himself to his creatures, hence the need for an other God, heteros theos, besides the maker of the universe. And then he gives a bunch of references for dialogue with Tryphon for that, who has never done or said anything except what he who is the creator of the universe, above whom there is no other God, willed him both to do and to say.
Just before you continue, I shared a file with all the patristic quotations where the Father alone is alter theos. So I think that would be a very good thing. So I think that would be a very good thing to have in your pocket whenever you discuss it with a Trinitarian, especially like a Latin West Trinitarian, so even Augustine believed it.
And the end of this quotation from Mins and Parvis is also nice. Justin's subordinationism succinctly encompasses both a courageous acknowledgement of the folly of the cross and deliberately startling assertion of the real, though secondary, divinity of Jesus.
Yeah, and notice, like, it's not secondary in function only. Like, the Father sends the Son. It's more than that. It's more ontological.
It's not just the order; it's also the personal attributes here.
So.
Yeah, that one's pretty choice.
And just to kind of clarify,
will be, well, he just didn't have the clear language or the precise language to use at the 4th century.
No, he meant the same thing we mean. He just didn't have the language for it.
But just to clarify too, that this is the reason that Michael Servetus was killed by John Calvin, is because he believed that he was the son of the eternal God, and he makes that distinction. Servetus says he is the son of the eternal God, not the eternal Son of God. And he was killed for that reason alone.
Yes, but Servetus was more of a modalist. But yeah.
Sure, but okay, whatever you want to call him. But that's like the distinction between Trinitarianism and at least Michael Servetus is that they believe that he is the eternal Son. I'm sorry, the eternal Son of God.
God the Son.
Yeah, eternal God the Son. So
yeah, I think it really irked Calvin when Servetus referred to the Athanasian model of the Trinity as being like Cerberus who guards Hades. And then history repeats itself because just recently,
Craig would agree with that.
One of the missionaries in the cavalry actually just says like, "Oh, is it like the way that the Trinity is being described to me? It's like Fluffy from Harry Potter," and it's like, Oh, that's so poetic that you made the same connection there that Michael Sabine making.
I know it's a bit irreverent, but like we've all seen the Lutheran satire, St. Patrick's Bad Analogies, right?
Yep.
No, I haven't.
Okay,
Oh.
well you have to. You know, Voltron. That's personalism, Patrick.
Who taught that?
I'm gonna stab you in the face.
Okay,
Patrick.
okay,
Okay, maybe that's a little too much.
What is the analogy of Luffy, Luffy or whatever his name is? I have not read or watched any Harry Potter books for over a decade, so I don't really keep in touch with any of that stuff. So, what was the reference he was making?
Oh, there's a creature in the Harry Potter series called Fluffy that is directly modeled on the Cerberus. So three-headed dog.
And finally, William. Oh, I'm sorry.
The guard dog in the first Harry Potter book. Okay,
Mhm.
okay, now I'm.
Yeah, and also, funny enough, William Lane Craig actually thinks that's actually a very good analogy for the Trinity.
Yeah, it's very good.
You should see, like, when James White was reviewing William Lane Craig, the eye rolling was amazing. It's like, for once, I have to agree with White, but
Yeah, he doesn't always hit the mark.
but you know, someone funny enough, like when it comes to say conjoined twins, you don't believe who actually wants to use that as a positive analogy for the Trinity.
But
Fred
would
Anson.
that be considered partialism, like the heresy of partialism or something like that?
No, they're distinct. Do we want to take a tangent on that one?
I think it's worth a discussion, because I think that when you study, and understand prosopon, the prosopon was a mask that the Greek actors would wear. And that's where person comes from, obviously. But prosopon is the mask has no being to it. I mean, there is the being, but it has no will. It has no rationality to it. The mask itself is simply the persona that the character, the actor, would play on the theater. And so when you look at Trinitarianism, it's the same actor playing three different characters with three different masks simultaneously. And you have, I mean, when you understand that the masks have no being, they're just a person. It's a persona, it's a character. And the characters really can't have their own wills. They can't have their own being, their own reality, their own substance. It's all the same substance being, it's a mass noun substance being played by three different qualitative or I can't remember the name of it. It's kind of like gold when you have gold, but you also have gold coins. So the coins are the substance of gold, but it's all the same substance. And that's how the Trinity kind of evolved into, and which you have gold praying to itself, or, you have God praying to himself. It just makes no sense.
But he's just praying to him in his humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like the thing, like the impersonal nature, that's very good, because it kind of shows, like, when it comes to say the human nature and the human body that Christ inhabited, it was in hypostatic. It was not like a person itself. So basically, Jesus was inhabiting impersonal human nature. And although Trinitarians are not docetic, if they were to be logical about that, that's a very docetic model of anthropology and Christology. But like, when you were discussing, like, say that the gold and the gold kinds, like this morning I was listening to a debate between Bo Bronson, who's an Eastern Orthodox philosopher, and the son-in-law of Anthony Buzzard, Carlos Xavier, who's even worse than Anthony Buzzard, if you're familiar with him. But basically, Bo Bronson was basically like, when it comes to say the being and person of God, it's like you have this pile of clay, and you have the statue that you made from the clay. Like, the statue and the clay, lump of clay, are like the same being of clay, but like of course they're in some way distinct as well. You would not claim that the lump and the statue is necessarily one-to-one equivalent, and that's a analogy for the Trinity and the monarchy of the Father and things like that. But one of the most amazing attempts to get around, like say, modalism into Trinity is like this guy Brian Leftow. He had an essay called "Modes Without Modalism." So in his view, God is a single person, and this is where it kind of gets very Star Trek-y. But because he inhabits, because he's outside of time, at the same he can actually be three persons but one person at the same index goal of time.
Mm-hmm.
If that kind of makes sense,
because only God is capable of doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of odd. It's kind of like Q continuum stuff from Star Trek, but that's the absurdities you have to go through,
But what we can see is we can actually see the devolving of God's Justin's God, which is a collective. It's a community. It's a unity, and it turns into, from a collective noun, God turns into a mass noun of spirit, and spirit is, it permeates everything, and he can come as different modes of spirit, different modes of different persons. It's this persona, this mask that he plays, and when we look at it, each mode doesn't have its own will. Each character he plays, it's all the will of the same being, or the mass noun spirit. And I don't know, it's just neo-modalism to me.
If you ever talk to Dr. Robert Bowman, I'm sure he'll set you straight.
Oh, I've discussed this with Robert Bowman.
I stand by why I said it's like his daughters are his material these days.
He thinks that homo means one.
His daughter's doing what?
Oh no, it's one of the most cruel things I've ever said about someone. But like, I'm pretty sure like he has his like teenage daughter help write his articles for him. It would explain like why there's such low IQ stuff.
Yeah, but homo is same, not one, and that's where the confusion comes. Is it's the same issue between fewer and less, because people do not understand mass nouns and count nouns. You've got when we talk about fewer, we talk about fewer items. You don't say less items. You say less gold or less water, or so less goes with mass nouns, fewer goes with count nouns. And so once you understand the idea between count nouns and mass nouns, God starts to make sense. And their God is a mass noun because Nicaea made them a mass noun. He made it homo, same, ousia, being. If they try to make it say same substance or same nature, which are both mass nouns, being is it's a count. I mean, it really is a count noun, but they use it as a mass noun. I don't know if that made sense.
To one thing, like, when I talk about the Trinity and all that, and it's like every time that when you try to kind of, okay, let's analyze what you mean by being. Let's analyze what do you mean by person, all that. Or what do you mean by ontological? They always they're going to come by like, it's a mystery, or human mind are not able to comprehend. Two, it's a in theological meaning, not a in everyday space. So basically, person does not actually mean a person, but a person in a theological sense. Ontological, even though like in the past, we're talking about the different human nature and all that. Like it was one of the I had this debate on the those Christian review moment. Somebody was saying like, oh no, ontologically doesn't mean nature, even though that's exactly what ontological mean. But you have to use ontological in intelligible sense. I'm like, so you're redefining words to fit your own agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they make up whatever they want.
Yeah.
They don't care about dictionaries and definitions. They just make up whatever they
but
want.
you see, like the Trinity, the Trinity and the being of God is outside of creation, so we don't just have the analogies or the ideas to explain this. And when
Yeah,
Jesus said, eternal life, he's no God, it's like, well, what would he know?
Yeah, it's a mystery. We don't know. It's a mystery. He's just a mystery.
It's their favorite thing to say. It's like when they're pushed to a corner, they will just say it's a mystery. It's like their default reaction. Oh, it's a mystery.
Well, it's a mystery that you only understand once you're regenerated.
Yeah. Even that.
Yeah. All right, shall we move on?
I got 14.
Go for it.
I have 15, so.
Oh, cool. I'll do 14. You can do 15, and then I got 16. This one's it's not like theologically deep. It just struck me as extremely pleasant. So the demons overpower those who do not strain in every way after their salvation. So that part right there is, there's that. In the same way, we ourselves, after being persuaded by the Logos, recoil from them and follow the only unbegotten God through the Son. Of old, we rejoiced in promiscuity, and now we embrace only temperance. Then we practice magical arts, but now we have dedicated ourselves to the good and unbegotten God. Then we loved above everything the means of acquiring money and property. Now we put on common use even what we have and share with everyone in need. Then we hated one another and murdered one another, and because of custom, would not even live under the same roof as those who were not of the same race. Now, after the appearance of Christ, we eat at the same table, and we pray for our enemies and try to persuade those who unjustly hate, so that those who have lived according to the good counsels of Christ might have a good hope with us of obtaining the same things from the God who is ruler of all. I just thought that was it's most reminiscent of the letter to Diognetus in that regard. It's just like a very nice picture of what it is to be a Christian, not just to be theologically correct, but actually.
I liked how they brought everything into common stock. Basically, they had all things in common. They were living the law of consecration, which I thought was pretty cool.
In the earliest period, but we do see some indications of that coming unhinged, probably in different areas at different times. And then probably by the late 2nd century, you don't see that anywhere anymore.
Yeah. That's why they went into into hermetism, is they would go and live a hermetic life rather than having everything in common. That was part of the apostasy.
Yeah, you didn't really see things like the Desert Fathers in the earliest decades or centuries of the church. Nah.
I know it's rather obvious, but like for Justin, as seen in that quote and throughout his work, for him, Satan and demons was not like, say, a metaphor, like simply like, say, an internal tempter. He actually did believe in the existence of supernatural evil as well. For those of us who have unfortunately had to deal with Christadelphians like Jonathan Burke, that's pretty important. But but I just thought I'd throw it out there. For like, they did believe in a literal angels and Satan. And funny enough, like Justin was informed by one Enoch, and he used like extra biblical tradition to not to come to the conclusion of Satan and demons, but to explain Satan and demons, which kind of shows like even in the Satan knowledge and these demonology, he held to like a very non-sola scriptura perspective. Appealing to Enochian literature and stuff like that, like the Enochian interpretation Genesis 6 and the sons of God there.
Well, you can go all the way back to Ignatius, and you can see that there was also an oral tradition about angels that had existed in at least to this period that they didn't even want to commit to writing in general, let alone the Apocrypha.
Yeah. the one thing that it kind of reminds me of is the in the Book of Mormon. After Jesus Christ came, the Nephites all are basically living in common, sharing all the property, all that is just living in common. But as some time progressed, people started doing their own thing. They started to kind of like uh, stop following what the original did, and it took about like 300 years to kind of happen. And it's kind of like what is happening. We're going to see the same thing happening with the church fathers.
Mhm.
And to me, that's a very, very interesting parallel between the two.
Robert, you had 15?
Yeah. The question of whether Justin alludes to infant baptism. First apology 15, and this is from the Barner translation. Many, both men and women, who have been Christ's disciples from childhood, have preserved their purity at the age of 60 or 70 years, and I am proud that I could produce such from every race of men and women. This quote, and also like the quote attributed to Polycarp, like for like 86 years I've served Christ. Some proponents of infant baptism have claimed, well, this means that they practice infant baptism, and this is like the early mid-2nd century, even before Tertullian and his own baptism. So the argument by some, whether Presbyterian or Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, regardless of your theology of baptism, is like this is evidence of infant baptism in the earliest patristic text. And Bernard actually has a note here. Justin's statement is evidence for peoples having belonged to the church for a long period of time. Compare Polycarp's 86 years of service of Christ, martyrdom of Polycarp and other works, and Papilus's statement in the Acts of the Martyrs that he has served the Lord, quote, from youth up, unquote. None of these texts, however, state explicitly that these Christians were baptized as children, and Justin's statement could mean no more than that these men and women had been instructed in the Christian faith from childhood and have had grown up as members of a Christian family. Joachim Jeremias, a Presbyterian who was a proponent of this infant baptism in the first 4 centuries, however, holds that the men and women mentioned by Justin were baptized as children between 80 and 95 CE, and against this interpretation see Court Hollande, did the early church baptize infants, ? Preserved their purity could mean remain virgins. This is possible as Justin has quoted the eunuch saying in Matthew 19 verses 11 and 12, Christian immediately after the saying on divorce, Matthew 5:32. And for the practice of light law and for virginity amongst Christians, there is the 2nd century pagan account of Galen. So whatever is going on here, the idea, like, say, being Christians or belonging to the church for like 70, 80 years or what have you, is not actually evidence that they practice infant baptism. It just means that they belong to a believing community. The analogous to, like, say, Latter-day Saints would be, like, say, if you're 90 years of age and you're a lifelong Latter-day Saint, you could still say, you're being a believer since for 90 years. Doesn't mean you were baptized in infancy. Once again, I've realized that there is a, so once kind of realized this kind of is important, but this is like it kind of shows like how much straining at straws you have to engage in if you're a proponent of infant baptism.
And in contrast to that being a very stretch of an allusion to it, you have Clement of Alexandria recalling the ancient tradition of the Apostle John, where he raised an infant being given, an orphaned infant being given to the bishop and reared, cherished, taught, and finally baptized, and because it was a Christian infant, right? The parents killed during persecution, that it shows that they weren't doing infant baptism. Is that right, Errol?
Sorry, which one was that?
I was just talking about, in contrast to this, very stretch of an allusion to infant baptism, allegedly, you have that Clement of Alexandria statement that's very solid in showing that there wasn't really infant baptism.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're going to try to prove infant baptism, then that's about as good as it's going to get as far as material goes, right? At least from the earliest period. I mean, you could try Irenaeus's passing statement
Well,
on.
I think that if we look at chapter 61, he talks about baptism, and I think this absolutely refutes infant baptism by Justin Martyr's position. And he says, "And for this rite, we have learned from the apostles this reason: since at our birth we are born without our knowledge or choice, by our parents coming together." He says, "and we're brought up in bad habits and wicked training, in order that we may not retain the children of necessity and in ignorance, but we may become the children of choice and knowledge." He's saying that you have to choose baptism, because when you're born, you don't have a choice being born, but you can choose being born again. And I think that's his point in chapter 61.
And also that would kind of refute the idea, like, when it says like we're born without our choice, maybe, proponents of like infant baptism would agree with that, but it's at the fate of the parents or the sponsors that the person is baptized. So they still don't have a choice. So for Justin, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know here, like, whatever the ambiguity of this statement in this particular chapter is, the more explicit enunciations of the mode and manner of baptism and those who are baptized, and kind of goes against like whatever he was saying. It clearly was not infant baptism, and
Right.
As like 61 and other sources, like the death knell to this, unless you're going to claim like Justin was inconsistent, which he may have been, but like not on this kind of central issue, because he keeps harping on infant free will, baptism, and all these things throughout. It's not like, say, a peripheral thing that he's struggling with, or he has questions about,
Yeah, and not only that, but he does talk about, he quotes Matthew, or quotes, he says, "I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And he didn't believe that infants were sinners. I mean, that just wasn't in his worldview. And that goes directly to the Book of Mormon and infant baptism in Moroni 8, where, Moroni quotes this same verse: "I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance." And
if
he
only he had
says,
the writings of John Calvin. I mean, sorry, Paul.
yeah. So, yeah, infants are not sinners. He did not come to call the infants to repentance.
So
that's back to chapter 15.
no, that's a wrap, man.
Let's see.
I got 2 out of 16. 16 is chock full of goodness.
Oh yeah. Go
So
for it.
in the early part of 16, this actually kind of expounds a little bit on the bit from
just on 13, if I could just very briefly touch upon that before we're going to go into 16.
Back to 13. Okay.
How God has no need of streams of blood or libations or incense. Hopefully we'll, if not in this stream, maybe in the next one, but we'll get into like Justin's view, like say transmutation and the Eucharist and all that jazz. But he never once affirms the idea that God needs ongoing appeasement or propitiation. So like whenever he critiques, like say, the pagan sacrifices that were propitiatory and expiatory, he never says, well, we have this ongoing propitiatory sacrifice, the Eucharist or the Mass. So it's the same when it comes to, say, early Christians' creeds against images. There's no qualification. Well, you have these images and they're idolatrous, but we have this kind of sacred, sanctified understanding that you've corrupted, So whenever he always he always states without qualification, like, arguments against pagan libations and sacrifices. But like, if he was a proto-Catholic or proto-Eastern Orthodox, what was the Eucharist? A Christianized libation, if you will, and there's no qualification here. So like, once we kind of get into like his understanding, say, real presence and transmutation, because he actually does use the term transmutation for the Eucharist, whatever he meant there, the end, or the telos, if you will, was not to appease God's wrath against sin. It was a sacrifice of thanksgiving and praise through his use of Malachi 1:11. So as a preface to whatever we do get to the Eucharist, I think that's kind of important to keep in mind.
Yes.
Mhm. I like that.
So every time I've had a conversation with a bishop I've served under, which I usually made a point to, because especially earlier on, I don't have to mention the whole I don't think of myself as a Mormon thing anymore. Win. But
We're all ex-Mormons now.
but I did have to go over the whole real presence thing and explain myself in a way that the bishop could be comfortable being confident that I'm worshiping the sacrament and the Eucharist itself. But it really does kind of help you to take it seriously. I could go so far as to say that it's like partaking of the Eucharist isn't something to be taken lightly. And if you hold a real presence view, it kind of solidifies that. That makes sense.
It's not mundane at all. It's not like, say, a routine, or at least it should not be a routine.
Yeah, and there have been points where I have, because I won't just take it routinely. Like if I don't feel that I'm spiritually in the right place for it, I'm not going to partake of it. And then I read about, it might have been Spencer W. Kimball, it was one of the, or was it Ezra Taft Benson? One of the modern day prophets actually, on one occasion turned it down himself. And when asked about that afterwards, it's because, spiritually he wasn't in the right place for it. His mind wasn't on what it should have been. And I thought that, yeah, it's like that, but that's kind of easy for me to remember because presence. But that's my own little soapbox for beliefs not necessarily particularly common, shall we say, to Latter-day Saints. It's
that's just kind of nice, the proto-Ignatian epistles, and just get over and done with. It'll be fine.
Well, I mean, he was one of our bishops, so there we go.
I do have to say that the whole Eucharist and the sacrament, yes we talk about how it's important to take it to renew our vows and whatnot, but we tend to not talk about what it actually mean. What does it mean to actually bless a sacrament? What is that whole process? What does it actually mean what is the effect of blessing the sacrament? If you, in the sense of the Eucharist and the real presence, we don't really expand on that, and then don't really see anyone talking about that.
Well, you do if you pry, because when it gets right down to brass tacks and the Latter-day Saint view of it, it's not purely symbolic insofar as the sacrament has a real spiritual effect on those who partake of it. Yeah, and it's like a necessary part of one's salvation.
Yes, but we don't go explore that thought more than that. That's you understand what I'm trying to say here?
Does. I bet someone does. Maybe Robert's read something to that effect. But he is not in seat at the moment. So
he's taking a break. Yes, I had to as well. Yeah, he talks about the Eucharist and talks about that later, that we're going to get to that, which is interesting. Just kind of a hint, or he mentions how they took wine and mixed it with water. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that one too, because
we're gonna get into that one too. Yes.
Yeah, there's so much here.
Oh, there is.
I think we're on 16. I'm ready.
You were wanting to do 16? Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
hearkening back to 14, specifically a little bit about how we eat at the same table and we pray for our enemies and try to persuade those who unjustly hate, etc. Just another good opportunity for me to get on my non-resistant soapbox. The beginning of 16, let's see, about being long-suffering and the servants of all and not irascible. These were the things he said. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other as well, and do not hinder him who takes your tunic or cloak. And whoever becomes angry is liable to the fire. And everyone who presses you into service for a mile, follow for 2. So bunch of Matthew verses there. And let your good works shine before people, so that seeing them they may honor your Father in heaven. More of Matthew 5. For one must not resist, nor has he wished us to be imitators of evil people, but he has urged that all be led from shame and desire of evil things through endurance and meekness. This we are able to demonstrate in the case even of many who have joined us, that changed from being violent and tyrannical. So yeah, from being violent to being non-violent. But you guys have all heard my spiel on non-resistant before, so I'll
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Before you go
just put this
that,
right here.
Robert Bolin, do you have any? Did you heard about? Were you listening when I said about the whole communion when you protect the church, all that, or you were just away? You didn't hear that conversation.
No, I didn't hear. I was going to the
Okay.
wise room.
So one thing I was saying is that as part of the LDS members, we definitely talk about how we bless the sacrament and we need to be pure to take it or whatnot, but we tend to not go further than that. We don't explore the idea what actually does it mean to uh, what does it mean? What does it mean actually when we bless the sacrament? What does actually mean when it happened? Like the Eucharist like the Catholic and Orthodox when they talk about the Eucharist. Do you have any?
Yeah, I would say that we would hold to a very same view of Ignatius, like a mystical presence or spiritual presence view.
Yeah. But my question: do you find any writers or anything like that that kind of explores further that thought, or is kind of the same reason we don't really kind of like deal with it?
We have a pretty undeveloped Eucharistic theology. I think like maybe like some of it is like a knee-jerk reaction. Like if you kind of it's like why we don't really speak about Mary so much in the church. Like you don't want to be associated with the idolatry of Romanism. The same when it comes to the Eucharist. Like unfortunately, there's like this kind of idea like, well, if you speak of it or you try to develop the theology that our scriptures has, you know that might lead to problems, which is like absurd, but like it's a knee-jerk reaction. But yeah, it would be interesting because like if you read the prayers of the sacrament, it's God who actually we ask God to bless. So there's like a divine intrusion twice and stuff like that. So it would be kind of interesting like to explore that vis-a-vis the nature of real presence and spiritual presence. But yeah. But like but all the possibilities, what you can't affirm, of course, is like it's a propitiatory sacrifice, which of course would preclude any form of transubstantiation or transsalamination, as the Eastern Orthodox would claim, because of course, like there's other problems with that. But yeah, but there's like some type of there is a real presence in their theology, just like real presence and transubstantiation are not one-to-one equivalent, even according to the Catholic Church.
Well, just like when you look at baptism, baptism is the representation of the death of Christ. And when we take the sacrament, it's basically we are eating his body. And so there is very similar things when we actually take on, you are what you eat, basically. If you think about you are what you eat, when we take the sacrament, we literally become like Jesus. I mean, it's basically that's what it's representative of. Is we take on that spiritual nature. And of course, as Latter-day Saints, we view baptism as, we view taking the sacrament as basically being rebaptized. We're recommitting our baptismal covenants, and as long as we are worthy of our baptismal covenants, we are worthy to take the sacrament. It's the same thing. We don't see quite that correlation in Patristics or in the writings of the ECS, but there's still a lot of correlation, a lot of similarities.
Yeah, maybe one day the prophet and the apostles are going to take time to explain more of that, but maybe not. Who knows?
Well, I don't think our modern day prophets have a early church fathers view of the sacraments.
I'm saying, but what I'm saying is that maybe one day that they will explore what it actually means, kind of what Mary signifies for the church, what it actually means when we protect the sacrament. Maybe one day they're going to talk about it, but so far as we're going to leave it in the dust on the unknown.
How long more do we want to go today? You're muted.
I'm good for another hour.
I am good.
3 hours.
I'm good. My day is wider.
Did we lose Jake?
My day is wide open, so it's really up to you guys.
Jacob is still there, like he's still participating. It's just like I have no idea where he's gone. Maybe his wife and or kids.
Well, he said he had to use a washroom or something like that.
Okay.
So I thought it was interesting. Back in chapter 16, he says that and let those who are not found living as he taught be understood to be no Christians, even though they profess with the lip to be the precepts of Christ. For not those who make profession, but those who do the works shall be saved. That right there is not anywhere near faith alone. That destroys faith alone. For those who make profession, yeah. But those who do the works shall be saved. For according to his word, not everyone who says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father in heaven.
Yeah, I've cited that one frequently. It's pretty brutal, especially within the context, of the time, because after he cites like Matthew and Luke and whatnot in support of that one, he ends with, and we request that those who do not live according to his teachings and are only called Christians be punished by you, the Roman rulers, as well. So if they, so
if they're saying they're Christian and they're not living, let Rome have the full legal authority to take care of them.
Because we're not doing the things that you're accusing us of doing, the immoral.
Right.
Find someone who's doing that. They're not really a Christian anyway. So yeah, to have at it.
Yep.
Even if they speak the teachings of Christ with their tongues. Yep. Not good enough.
Not those who make profession. Can't just profess Christ, people. Doesn't work that way.
I like it because I especially like that quote because you have both the people who are take our side of things on the faith plus work, saying that supports them, as well as you have the faith alone Protestants trying to use that Matthew to support their side by saying you guys in your works might think you're actually Christians, but but Justin Martyr clearly falls on it's your lifestyle, you're keeping the commandments, not just professing to be Christian. So it's good. I really like that he lays that out very clearly.
Yeah, because he cites Matthew profusely there. There's really no way around it.
Like the biggest thing that is in this entire book that I'm noticing over and over again. He was like, okay, action matters. Your deed matters. If you don't do what you did, then it means absolutely nothing. And yes, and you see, and you're also comparing the action of non-believers and the wicked and the immorals, and then you were saying that those are the action of the wicked, but the righteous will stop doing those actions. So it's just the same point over and over again and again and again.
True.
Well, it's been about 2 hours. Do we want to continue this next Saturday? Is everyone available next Saturday?
We were just saying that we could stay another hour if or you're still on.
I know I'm not the only one who's not going to be available next Saturday.
Okay. Well, I've been on and off just because I have some other things I've been having to deal with. So, yeah, if you guys want to do another hour, I can just leave the chat up and.
No, we could table this. I mean, Robert, did you have a limit?
Something very briefly on chapter 18.
You want to do chapter 18 and then call it for today?
Yeah, it's very brief. It's more like an apologetic thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I got 18 as well. So yeah, let's take up 18.
Yeah, sure. Chapter 18. I just read from the Shaft translation. We expect to receive again our own bodies, though they be dead and cast into the earth. For we maintain that with God nothing is impossible. Now, like the physical resurrection of the dead is basically affirmed by like most groups, but this is actually a very good text against a certain group. I'll let you guess which one, that claims that there's no physical resurrection and the body we receive is not the same body we have in mortality. You know, the JWs. You know, so this kind of shows like Jehovah's Witness eschatology. It wasn't no matter what gymnastics you want to engage in, like no one actually held this kind of view of the resurrection. So for Justin, the same body we have now, albeit perfected, will be numerically one and the same as the resurrected body will receive. And like he kind of the objection is like, well, you know, once you're dead, you know, and you go to dust, like how the heck will that happen? It's like, well, he kind of acknowledges like it's impossible, you know, for man it's impossible, but God, like this reanimation, this resurrection is possible. And so like not only do you have physical resurrection being affirmed, not a spirit only resurrection, but it's numerically the very same body that we have now that we'll possess in the resurrection. There's no two bodies theory that Jehovah's Witnesses, and funny enough, some Christ mythicists like Richard Carrier argues part of the New Testament eschatology. So I just thought that was interesting.
Well, there is that, and it's not just the Jehovah's Witnesses, but in the same chapter, it kind of extends to, well, it would still apply to them, but also this would extend to Seventh-day Adventists as well, because Justin says, consider what happens to each of the kings that have been. They die just like everybody else, which if death led to unconsciousness, would have been a godsend to all the unjust. But since consciousness endures for all those who have existed and eternal punishment lies in store, take care to be persuaded and to believe that these things are true. For conjurings of the dead, both visions obtained through uncorrupted children, I'm only going to get into that heinousness there, and the summoning of human souls, and those whom magicians call dream senders or attendants. I suppose like a spirit medium, yeah. And the things done by those who know these things, let them persuade you that even after death, souls remain in consciousness. That's that no soul sleep. For a little bit, briefly, once upon a time, I fellowshipped with the Adventist Christian Church. They're not the Seventh-day Adventists, but they do agree with the Seventh-day Adventists on soul sleep, and that was just one of the things that.
Aren't they like I could be continuing like another Advent Christian group, but aren't they like at the very least allow Unitarianism or something like that? Because I know that there's very small groups of them in the States. Or
the Adventist Christian Church is mostly an East Coast church. You won't find it out west. Essentially, they're big. They're mostly mainstream Protestant, but they're really big conditionalists. Conditional immortality is like a huge part of their things. Like
And
good-
that's actually a growing movement in Protestantism in America.
I think it is. I did a study of Clement of Rome's Epistle to the Corinthians with the good Reverend John Herschel Roller and some of the people from his congregation back in the day. And I learned a bit from them, but ultimately ended up a little too Protestant.
So you're saying that the idea of soul sleep, or the idea where you kind of just cease to exist, is a growing trend in Protestantism? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not just like soul sleep, but also like basically conditional mortality, like a rejection of eternal conscious torment and like more like say annihilationism. There's this guy called Chris Date. I'm not sure if you heard of him, but like he runs the Rethinking Hell thing. He used to be like, he's a five-man Calvinist, funny enough, but he used to hold to the traditional view. Then he had an interview with Edward Fudge, who's like perhaps there's like two types of conditionists. You have the very crappy ones like the Rob Bell types, but you have the more scholarly types like a Fudge or someone like that. So I'm focusing on the better ones. He kind of was convinced after having like interviewed with Fudge and like studying this. But like it is a growing movement in largely American Protestantism, and not just like liberal Protestantism, actually conservative Protestantism as well.
Well, exactly.
What do you mean?
How do you compare a good God with an evil hell? I mean, it's the cognitive bias or cognitive dissonance is just overwhelming.
Okay, what do you mean conditionists? What do you mean?
Conditionalism is basically like not everyone will be. For them, eternal life and immortality are one-to-one equivalent. And I think that's one of the fallacies. But taking that as the assumption, conditionalist is basically someone who claims not everyone will live eternally. So for them, hell is annihilationism or destruction, ceasing to exist, basically.
So you're basically saying that in according to their view is that once we die, they go to heaven, and if you're a good Christian, once you die, you go to heaven. If you're a bad Christian, you cease to exist.
No, because they believe both the righteous and the wicked once they die cease to exist. But at the resurrection, the righteous are judged worthy to go to heaven or a paradisical earth. But the incorrigibly wicked, they go to hell. But for them, hell is annihilation or destruction, like ceasing to exist.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see. So if I understand what you're saying, is that for them is that everyone dies, and they cease to exist until the resurrection, and when the resurrection, only the good Christian gets resurrected, and the rest of it just they don't get resurrected; they just simply.
Well, no, the wicked will be resurrected, but they won't be immortal. They'll be raised to judgment, but then they'll be destroyed
completely.
Now, there are some like conditionists, like mainly Christadelphians, who believe that not everyone will be resurrected or raised to judgment. But that's a very small view. The predominant view, even amongst like say conditionists, would be everyone will be raised to judgment, but only the righteous will be immortalized. Because again, for them, they commit a fallacy. They think eternal life, that's spoken about in John 17:3, is one-to-one equivalent to immortality. Now, immortality is part of eternal life, but eternal life is not exhausted by simply being immortal. It's a quality, it's a type of life God himself enjoys, you see.
Yep.
Okay.
And with that, see, we already did 21. I don't have anything else all the way up till this is the central gap in the apology. I don't have anything else till 28.
I have something on 26 about
that we can
accusation of
catch
eating
that
in flesh and stuff like that.
So we'll pick up on 26 next time, unless somebody else has something earlier than that.
I've got 21 or 20, 21, 22, and then 26. Yeah.
We did a little bit from 21, especially on the deification bit. But it sounds like you got a couple other things before that even. So 20.
Yeah, we
Let's
can
see.
start returning.
Before we say, let's see, heathen analogies to the Christian doctrine. He just basically just a real quick thing. He just says that Plato is basically, he says, while we say that all things have been produced and arranged into the world by God, we seem to utter the doctrine of Plato. So it sounds like the I'm sorry, the people who think against this think that we could get this doctrine from Plato, but I'm not seeing that, and we basically have already talked about that. In chapter 21, he says, and we have learned that those who are deified are those who live near God in holiness and virtue. Yeah, chapter 22, for moreover the Son of God called Jesus, even if only a man by ordinary generation, yet on account of his wisdom is worthy to be called the Son of God. For all writers call God the Father of men and gods. And if we assert that the Word of God was born of God in a particular manner, different from ordinary generation, let this, as said above, be no extraordinary thing to you. So all the writers call God the Father of men and gods, and the Son of God is a born of God in a particular manner, which I think he's talking about the fact that Jesus is the mortal Son of God, and that is unique to Christianity. Well, I mean, he does talk about the different the different gods that the Roman gods have procreated, but only one. All the writers of those who say the high God, or the God, the Father of men and gods, as one Son of God.
Yeah. 6 and 28.
Then chapter 26 is really interesting too.
And that's where we're going to pick up next time.
Sounds good.
Sounds like you and Robert got 26 on lock.
I love the arguments against Simon. I believe he was the Antichrist. I believe that he was the Antichrist that was prophesied by the apostles. Simon is the Antichrist.
But does his name have a numerical equivalent 666? At least 616, depending on who you ask. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So before we get carried away on any other tangents, this is probably a good time to duck out.
Yeah, I'm good.
Have to schedule something to pick up from 26 next time. So we made it almost halfway through the project.
Yeah, I didn't think they're gonna make it through all the way through.
Yeah.
Jacob, are you gonna send me the recording so I can put it on the YouTube channel?
It might be easier for me to just upload it on YouTube because it's going to be it depends on how big the file size is, right? I could I could try and send it over like Google Drive to you if you have via email. So
you said you still have some audio from previous.
Somewhere, and I have tons of audio recordings of different things, and I might have some. I'm pretty sure I have some
somewhere in there.
Yeah.
For posterity.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I recorded us talking. I mean, you were talking about your conversion with the Book of Mormon and non-resistance. So that was pretty cool.
Was that not terribly patristic? That not directly, but that's my bag right there. Well, all right. This is always a pleasure. I'm gonna have to try to. Yeah, we'll find something schedule-wise in the group.
Hopefully something in September if we can't do it next week.
Yeah, I think next week is out for. I'm going to be out of town, visiting friends for a housewarming party.
Well, for me, until my health gets better because of COVID, my schedule is wide open.
Okay.
Makes the thing simple.
Well, times like this on Saturday suit me, especially with the time zone difference at the moment. So
So
Jolly
you
good.
say this is a good time for you, Robert?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, cool. It's
All right,
great
wait.
catching up with
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Yeah. See ya.
Till next